Kristen. This has been very informative. I know there's a lot more questions. Feel free to reach out to Kristen with her information in the proceedings document. But now we're going to go on to our next presentation, which is by Mike Britt. Mike, feel free to start when you're ready.
Good afternoon, everyone, from Winter Haven, Florida. I think we're about as far up into the Headwaters region as you can get, minus a few other smaller communities around Winter Haven. So excited to be here, and also I think it's pretty opportune that we're having this conference on the first day of hurricane season. So I think a lot of us are probably already getting ready for hurricane season. So this is a nice opportunity. I'm excited to talk to you about the Winter Haven's One Water Master Plan. This is an effort that we are doing in conjunction with our partners in Nature Conservancy, and also Black & Veatch and Brown & Caldwell are our consultants on the project. So we're excited to be working on this with them. Next slide. The work that we're doing, we believe, kind of intersects the CHNEP plan in a lot of different areas, especially hydrological restoration, but also fish and wildlife habitat and water quality. And also it's looking at a lot of the quality of life components that go along with water resources as well. Next slide. So the Peace Creek, where Winter Haven is located, is in the very upper reaches of the Peace River watershed. You can see the purple circle showing where Peace Creek watershed is, and the red dot where downtown Winter Haven is located. And there's about 105 miles worth of Peace River between Winter Haven and Charlotte Harbor. But as many of y'all are aware, the Peace River provides a significant amount of water into Charlotte Harbor, and is a significant driver in kind of whether or not the main harbor is kind of going to meet its hydrologic goals in the future. Next slide. Kind of zooming in a little closer on Winter Haven, you can see that downtown Winter Haven is located in the middle of an entire lakes region. Also, Legoland, if you've been up to Winter Haven lately, Legoland is a great success located on Lake Eloise, which is part of the southern chain. Next slide. Winter Haven has two chains of lakes, the southern chain and the northern chain, that make up most of the lakes in Winter Haven. Not all of them, but most of them. There are about 54 lakes that are either inside or touching Winter Haven. The chain of lakes is also a swim priority water body, as Lazan was talking about earlier. And that plan hadn't been updated in a little while. It's probably becoming due as well. So we look forward to the opportunity to kind of work on that plan. Next slide. One of the components about water in Winter Haven is that there are two primary structures on the northern and southern chain of lakes that are shown in the purple arrows. Once water leaves the Winter Haven area and flows into the Peace Creek and Juanita Farms drainage canals, which also ends up in the Peace Creek Canal. But once it flows out of Winter Haven, there is no control of that water. That water flows unmanaged, more or less, all the way from these structures located at the chain of lakes, all the way to Peace River, and all the way to Charlotte Harbor. So there is quite a bit of storage in the lakes that happens. We have about a little over 5,000 acres of water in the city of Winter Haven, but really once it leaves our area, there is no control of that water as it flows to Charlotte Harbor. Next slide. So one of the key relationships that is driving our efforts is that the lakes in Winter Haven, and if you remember from the previous map, many of the lakes are round circles. And many of you probably know that those lakes were formed by sinkhole formation. And sinkholes are formed when the upper confining unit of the Florida Aquifer has collapses or fissures, and it allows the ground to depress and it fills up with water. So the lakes basically got here through means of their being connected to the Florida Aquifer. And this is the same Florida Aquifer where not only we get our local water supply, but also there's a 9-county region that makes up the Southern Waters Caution Area that Lazan also mentioned, that it gets their water supply from the Florida Aquifer as well. So Winter Haven is at the very top part of that recharge zone for the Florida Aquifer, including the lakes in Winter Haven. So that's really a really important concept to move forward with as we're talking about managing water in the future. Next slide. So as we do our plans, we're thinking about how the watershed is supposed to function naturally. And generally there are two functions going on in the Winter Haven area. The area outlined in yellow, we call the ridge area. And it's an area where there's more sinkhole lakes for one, but also there's a higher recharge zone there. A lot of sandy soils, recharge happening in the ground, a lot of percolation, things of that nature going on. And then the Polk Upland area is we call it the valley area, really, because the Polk Upland is kind of a misnomer. It really is the lower lying area there in between the lakes. And that's the area that captured and stored a lot of the water and slowly released this water in natural conditions south and southwest towards the Peace River. And it held and treated that water and provided a natural storage feature for much of that water before it moved out into the Peace River. Next slide. So here is a map showing the location of Winter Haven in the pink, but also, and it's kind of hard to see on the slide here, but there's an outline of the Peace Creek Drainage Canal that's flowing out of Winter Haven to the south and then off to the west as it flows to Peace River. And there's a picture on the right as to what the Peace Creek Drainage Canal actually looks like. You know, we call it the Peace Creek Watershed, but really it's dominated by this 34-mile long drainage ditch whose purpose is to get rid of water. So this drainage ditch was built in the early 1900s and mainly for draining land for pastures and farmlands, but still functions to this day as a way to basically get rid of water as fast as we can out of the watershed. Next slide. Another regional factor in what we're doing to kind of further manage water is the regional drawdown of the Florida Aquifer system. We used to call this the Big Red Hole, but the Water Management District is really doing a nice job at managing the Florida Aquifer. And you can see by this map how there's been so much recovery from the 1970s to the 2010 timeframe, for which this map is for. So there's a recovery that's happening in the aquifer system, which is very encouraging. And also, it's kind of interesting to point out the purple circle where Winter Haven is located. If you can see the light dotted line that passes through the east side of Winter Haven, that is the geologic or the hydrologic groundwater divide between East Florida and West Florida that runs through the middle of the state. So Winter Haven is right on that boundary of when water recharges to the aquifer. It mostly flows to the southwest, but it does show that we're at the very top of that hydrologic divide as well. Next slide. Also, one of the long-term impacts is the urbanization of this region. This is downtown Winter Haven on one of the high recharge zones that we built our community at, and it shows the two storm drains located at the intersection and the inlets that basically get rid of water off of the paved surfaces and directs that water down to the channel lake. So this is just kind of showing that disconnect between that water used to recharge in this zone naturally, but now it doesn't. And there are some long-term impacts associated with that. Next slide. So here is the general location in the purple circle, showing the location of the Peace Creek watershed. And it's, like I said, this area is part of the Southern Water Use Caution area. And the primary reason is because the lakes to the east that are shown in the pink dots off to the right-hand side of the slide are not meeting their MFLs. And there's a couple of lakes up towards Winter Haven that aren't meeting their MFLs, but also the Peace River just southwest of us between Bartow and Fort Meade and that upper reaches of Peace River are also not meeting their MFLs, or at least historically they have not up until recent times. The Water Management District's also done some nice projects with Lake Hancock that's helping that effort. So that's pretty exciting as well. So next slide. So the impacts are not only hydrological, there's also water quality impacts. And if you'll show the next slide, the yellow dots show the lakes that have historically been impacted for water quality and are listed on the impaired list. And many of the lakes show a relationship between impacted hydrology and water quality. So, you know, we are thinking that one of the primary means of improving water quality is to kind of improve the hydrology as well. So there's definitely a linkage between water quality and hydrology that we have to manage for as well. Next slide. So you take all that and all those relationships kind of into context, but also you have to realize that this Winter Haven area and the whole entire I-4 corridor is one of the fastest growing regions in the entire country. I think a year or two ago, the Winter Haven Lakeland area was listed as the 5th fastest growing metropolitan region in the entire country. So this is an area that's expected to grow very quickly. This is a map from the Water 2070 plan that shows water demand basically for this area, but we expect a significant amount of growth. And so the questions that we're asking are more along the lines of, you know, how do we manage for hydrologic improvements, and how do we start putting this part of the watershed back together, but also accommodate for future growth and economic development and, you know, quality of life components, things like that. So I didn't talk initially about this One Water Master Plan concept, but the idea behind this is, you know, how do we define all of those connections that we have to water resources within our community, within our watershed, that are not only hydrological and water quality, but also, you know, beauty and quality of life and recreation and, you know, all those benefits that water provides at a community setting. How do we factor all that in? How do we connect all that together, and how we plan for the future? So that's really what we're trying to accomplish with this One Water Master Plan process. Next slide. I've seen quite a few people on the attendee list that probably remember in 2010, Winter Haven adopted what's called the Winter Haven Sustainable Water Resource Management Plan. This was adopted by our city commission, and it was also adopted by the Charlotte Harbor National Estuary Program. I think in 2012, I think it was, but it basically set up the effort we're doing now. And it generally said, hey, there's a lot of wetland areas that could be restored, which is shown on the in the light blue areas on this map. That still, you know, don't have much development on them. You know, they're in the floodplains, and, you know, there's still opportunities there for putting the watershed back together. Well, of course, you know, right after 2010, the primary impacts of the economic downturn happened, and we moved forward in a technical sense, but it was difficult to move forward on the political side of things, just because there was such a focus on economic development at the time. So the work we're doing now picks back up on that effort and is beginning the process of implementing that plan. Next slide. So I would say that from 2010 to 2020 today, we're doing many of the same components and pushing forward the ideas from the 2010 sustainability plan. Next slide. The one big component that we're adding that I believe truly makes us into a One Water Master Plan as opposed to something different is we're also doing master planning for water supply, wastewater treatment, and reuse water as part of this as well. So there's another factor kind of added on as part of the layer of this system. But also it includes, you know, lakes and stormwater, natural systems, like I mentioned, recreation and quality of life, and economic development as well, but also the growth management component. But so the One Water Master Plan is focusing on those areas that can touch all of these components. So we would like to focus our effort and provide as many benefits to water as possible in all those realms with whatever we do. So this is a good framework to think about what we're trying to accomplish. Next slide. So here is the new and improved version, the 2020 version of the Sapphire Necklace plan. The 2010 plan had a Sapphire Necklace concept for the entire watershed, the entire Peach Creek watershed. And this is a Sapphire Necklace concept just for that area in and around Winter Haven. So the blue areas that you see on this map are wetlands that we believe could be restored. They're part of the floodplain now, and they probably are developable in some sense, but what we'd like to do is restore these wetlands as like a nature park kind of feature, and store more water, provide more habitat, but also allow development to grow up around these areas as part of our growth management plan. So one of the thought processes behind this idea is that the city of Winter Haven never could come up with the amount of money that's needed even to pay half of this kind of level of project. To restore this many wetlands and to try to put this hydrology back together as we grow and develop would be just probably an insurmountable task if we had to pay for this kind of work on our own. But the idea that we can do this as part of a growth management plan and encourage higher density development around these restored natural features, we could raise property values and create higher densities that uses less water per capita than we did before. That combination of kind of cost and benefit and amenities and development, it really makes sense to this high growth region where we need so much hydrologic restoration. So also one of the components that is really popular with a lot of our citizens is the green outline around this Sapphire Necklace component is a 30-mile long multi-purpose trail that could be used for biking or even commuting for work, those kind of things as alternate means of transportation. So that's generating a lot of excitement as well too. There are some purple areas shown that are more recharge areas. So these are areas in that those high recharge zones where we could recharge more reused water or storm water, things of that nature to help improve the underlying Florida aquifer. So this is kind of our concept we're working from. Next slide. So I've touched on many of these aspects already, but here's a listing of the plan elements that we're starting to put in place. So right now, we're just now finishing up phase 1 that includes kind of a preliminary version of almost all of these plans. So we're gonna kind of take a lot of this information now and assess kind of where we're at. We're gonna do some presentations to administrative level and hopefully even city commission level folks to begin moving this process forward. So the next phase will be the phase that will actually start creating the master plans. But this is a good time to be checking in with our partners throughout the watershed to let them know kind of what we're thinking about here. Some of the things I probably haven't touched on enough, but at the very bottom, the funding strategies, including the public and private partnerships. I can't stress enough how this plan is going to depend basically on a strategy for incorporating future development. One of the goals that many of us have up in the upper parts of the watershed are economic development. I think like many of our communities have for the long-term future, but there really is a difference in how we go about achieving that economic development. For a community like Winter Haven that calls ourselves a chain lake city and we think of ourselves as a water-centric community, how we go about this work for the long-term future is really important. So we're projecting this plan out to the year 2070. So it's a long-range 50-year plan, but we believe that time frame is very appropriate because it took 100 years basically to get the watershed to where we are now, and to the point where we realize how impacted it really is. Well, putting this together over a 50-year horizon for the future, we can start implementing funding strategies and partnerships and kind of rethinking the way we plan development around these water storage features, things of that nature. So we think that we're setting ourselves up for a more sustainable future from a water resource standpoint in Winter Haven for the long term. So next slide. Some of the things we hope to achieve, are, we talk about, aquifer recharge and water storage and those kind of things. But so one of the questions from a hydrologic standpoint is, how do you know what's enough? It's interesting. We've touched on so many things, so many of these things already today, but we talked about how we permit stormwater treatment facilities and how, if we keep permitting stormwater facilities the way we have in the past, are we going to be successful in the future? So we're starting to ask that question. We're starting to determine what that hydrologic budget looks like in the future based on what it was in the past. So the idea that the lakes are a natural feature in the watershed, and that those natural features are there for a reason. They're there because there's so much rainfall, so much recharge, so much pressure in the aquifer, things of that nature. Even in the face of urban development that could be changing the watershed long term, and in the face of even questions like, are rainfall patterns going to change? Are hurricanes going to get stronger? Or we're going to have more intense events? And what does that do for the watershed and the lakes in our community? We're going to be trying to answer questions like that too. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot of the breadth of kind of ideas we're trying to pull together. But the idea that water has value across many different dimensions of community life is really important to us. I should have mentioned in one of the slides, one of the other components we're trying to do is a full-scale economic evaluation of the cost and benefit of multi-benefit solutions. This idea of green infrastructure and restoring natural systems as we move along with future growth and development, we think is the key for providing these features that will help grow the economy. It will help spur economic development and higher density development. It'll spur walking trails and contact with nature that people might not have had otherwise over the course of the future from Winter Haven. So we feel like there's a lot of benefits that goes along with restoring these features, in addition to improving the hydrology for Peace River, Charlotte Harbor, generating water supply, not only for the Florida Aquifer and the 9-county region that depends on the aquifer, but also even managing the surface water flows for Peace River that's also used for water supply. So we think there's a lot of benefits that are really hard to tease out of this process and really hard to kind of make sense out of. So we're trying to pull all that apart, take a look at it, and then start putting it back together the way that we feel like makes better sense long term. So next slide. So just in conclusion, we really are trying to think of all the benefits that water plays within our community and how we interact with the region, including Charlotte Harbor and Peace River and the Florida Aquifer. We're trying to learn the lessons that we've had in the past where we built nature parks for stormwater treatment that have turned into some of our most popular parks we have in the community. We think that as we move forward and spending money for things like flood control and water supply and water quality, that there's a way to do that so that we're not managing water in silos. We're managing water as one collective resource, and that we're benefiting economic growth, tourism, recreation, lake levels, habitat, all those things. So we believe there is an answer to that question of, can you grow economically and still take care of water? And we think there is a way to do that. So we're exploring that. And the final thought on this is, the build out of this area and this, the Winter Haven area and the Peach Creek watershed, we can see a time when most of this watershed will be built out over the next 50 years. And, this is a good time to be stepping back and thinking about, how's that going to happen, and how can we help direct that, and how do we create those partnerships to make that happen? So with that, I'll stop.
Well, thank you. That was an excellent presentation. I know everyone enjoyed it as much as we did. We are gathering up questions. Looks like we have enough to get going. So if you want to just start selecting out those that you'd like to respond to.
Well, I'll just start at the top. Is there an opportunity to evaluate the natural channel design that we just heard for Peach Creek? Definitely. I was thinking the whole time that presentation was going on as to, what opportunities there might be. So one of the ways that the Peace Creek watershed functioned, it functioned more like the Everglades, is my picture of how that functioned, more so than a channel, a natural channel kind of system. So the water, I think, sheet flowed across much of the Peace Creek, lower Peace Creek area. So that's kind of more our model, is a sheet flow kind of Everglades kind of model. I don't really know if that's going to work, but where it doesn't work, I think going back to the natural channel design is a great thing to be looking at. Next question was, any consideration or possibility of the work done by a previous presenter? So that's kind of the same question, I think. So I'll kind of skip that one. Then it says, the thought is to manage growth, so it's concentrated rather than sprawled. Definitely. We think that we can concentrate a growth around the wetland areas as scenic vistas and waterfront and trails and those kind of things. And we believe people will be willing to live in a higher density community around one of those features than they would be otherwise. And the best example of that is the beaches, right? People will gather at the beaches and live in 10-story condos where they might not otherwise because of those natural amenities. So if we provide the amenities, I think we can get away with higher densities there. So the next question is there water quality data publicly available for the lakes mentioned? Yes, there is water quality data. I think a lot of that data is on the Lakes Atlas. I haven't looked at that in some time, but I believe that still is available on the Atlas that both Polk County and USF have managed in the past. So does the plan have a supervisor level manager? Yeah, I guess that would be me from the city standpoint. And then we have the Nature Conservancy as a partner with that. And Beth Lewis, the freshwater director for the state of Florida, and her partner Leslie are managers on that aspect. And then our managers at the Black and Veatch and Brown and Caldwell consultant teams would be a part of that as well. Next question, can something like GoFundMe crowdsourcing a funding strategy? No, interesting question. That's one thing I haven't thought of yet, but I think we'll be looking at all opportunities here in the very near future. So good idea. So next question is, how can our neighborhoods help with stormwater runoff? Can we obtain stormwater drain filters? Oh, that's funny. I saw that question in the previous presentation, and I kind of thought, I think I know who that is, but I think it's somebody in Winter Haven. But so I think the question is yes, I think, but we'd have to kind of look at that on a case-by-case basis. Next question, can the Winter Haven area canals be candidates for restoration urban canal design? Yep, same question I think as before. And then still, one of the best designed and thought out integrated water maintenance plans I have seen. Oh, thank you. It succeeds only with the support of elected officials and the general public, sustained over many years. What is our secret to sustaining support? Wow, oh boy, that's a whole nother presentation unto itself, but we are at that crossroads right now. It's interesting that the 2010 plan kind of started, gaining less support as the economic downturn happened. And here we are in another economic downturn that's moving forward maybe over the next year or two. So it's going to be interesting to see how much support we can generate here in the near future with all the budgetary concerns that are going on. So excellent question. And the other side of that too is, if we can convince the community this is in an economic best interest for future growth and for quality of life components, then I believe that this will manage itself long term is what we hope. So I think that's all the questions. I think we're out of time. So
great. Well, thank you so much, Mike. We really appreciated that. We are next going to Peter Rubrick. Peter, are you on the line?